Montana Territory, 1887. The wind howled down the tracks at Edgewood Station, kicking up dust and silence. Della Mae Morton stepped off the train with her gloved hands tight around the worn leather handle of her suitcase. The platform was empty, no sign of the man who was supposed to meet her. No horses, no wagons, not a soul. Just the sound of the train pulling away, leaving her behind. She turned slowly, scanning the wide, bare stretch of land. A single telegraph pole leaned to one side, and the station building, if it could be called that, was little more than a wooden shack with peeling paint and a broken sign swinging on one hinge. He was not here. She looked down at her gloves, then up again. There was no one coming. Della had answered an ad. A widower rancher named Thomas Briggs, age 42, seeking a God-fearing woman to help raise his 2 boys and share his life in Montana Territory. She had written him letters, told him about her life in Ohio, her late father's illness, her stepmother's bitterness, and her wish to start over. He had replied with kind words, promises of a quiet home and honest work. But now, nothing, just whined in silence. An hour passed, maybe more. The sun shifted, casting long shadows on the platform. Still, no one came. She sat on her suitcase, her back straight, chin up, but her throat burned. She swallowed hard. The last train did not come through until morning. There was nowhere to go, not even a hotel in sight. Then, in the distance, hoofbeats. She stood quickly, brushing dust from her skirt. A lone rider was coming down the trail from the west, a tall man on a chestnut horse, the sun catching on the silver buckle at his belt. He rode easy, one hand on the reins, the other resting near the saddle horn. He stopped a few yards from the platform, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. Della nodded once. "Thomas Briggs. He was supposed to meet me. Was his mail-order bride." The cowboy dismounted slowly, his boots stirring up dry dirt as he walked closer. He looked to be in his late 20s. Broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with a day's stubble on his jaw and a steady kind of stillness in his eyes. "Briggs died," he said plainly. "Over a week ago. Fell off his horse out near Red Hollow, broke his neck." Della's breath caught, her hand flew to her mouth. "What? I am sorry," he added, softer now. "I figured someone would send word, but folks out here, well, sometimes they forget, or they just do not care." She could not speak. Her knees weakened, but she did not sink. She had not come this far to fall apart in front of a stranger. The cowboy looked at her suitcase, then back at her. "You got somewhere to go?" "No," she straightened. "I do not." He nodded once, as if that settled something in his mind. "Name's Silas Lane. My ranch is about 8 miles west. You are welcome to come with me for the night, safer than staying here." Della hesitated. She had no friends here, no money to go back, and something in his voice, calm, honest, made her believe him. "I will pay you back for the trouble," she said. Silas gave a small shake of his head. "It is not trouble." He helped her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her, careful to leave space between them. The ride was quiet, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady clop of hooves. When they reached his ranch, dusk had settled low over the hills. The house was modest but warm-looking, with smoke curling from the chimney and a dog barking from the porch. Inside, it smelled of pine and coffee. Silas lit a lamp and set her suitcase near the hearth. "You can take the front bedroom," he said. "Door locks from the inside." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thin. "I will bring you some stew. Eat first, then rest." She nodded. "Mr. Lane, Silas," he said. "Silas," she repeated, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. "Thank you for not leaving me there." He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something flicker in them, not pity, something steadier. "You looked like you had been waiting long enough." Later that night, wrapped in a quilt that smelled of cedar and smoke, Della lay awake listening to the wind outside. She was not where she was supposed to be. Nothing had turned out like she planned. But for the first time since stepping off that train, she did not feel completely alone. The next morning she found Silas already outside, splitting wood. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and sweat darkened the fabric along his back. She stood on the porch, watching for a moment. "Do you need help with anything?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "You do not have to, I know," she said. "But I want to." He handed her a pair of gloves and showed her how to carry the cut logs. They worked in silence, side by side, until the sun climbed high. That evening, over supper, she asked, "Why did you come to the station yesterday?" He looked at her across the table. "My ranch hand was supposed to pick up some supplies in Edgewood. Got sick. I went instead." "So it was chance," she said. He held her gaze. "Maybe." Della lowered her eyes to her plate, but she felt something shift in her chest. A quiet pull. In the days that followed, she helped around the house, cleaned dishes, fed the chickens. Silas never asked her to, but he noticed. One afternoon they sat on the porch, drinking coffee. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Most women would have run," Silas said. "I thought about it," she admitted. "But you stayed." She looked out toward the hills. "I have never had much choice, but this time, I want to stay. If you will have me." He turned toward her, leaning forward just slightly. "I would be a fool to say no." Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. She smiled, small but real. Then maybe it was not chance after all. His hand closed over hers, warm and sure. "No," he said. "I do not think it was." The next week brought a slow thaw between them, like spring easing into the bones of the land. The days were still cold, the wind sharp off the high ridges, but the sky seemed wider somehow, and the silences between them less weighted. Della rose early without being asked, tying her hair back with a length of twine she found in her bag. She began tending to small things, mending a torn curtain in the front room, boiling lye soap in a kettle behind the house, scrubbing the floorboards on her knees until her palms stung. Each task gave shape to her days, steadied her hands. Silas didn't comment, but she caught the way he lingered near the porch when she was out hanging laundry, or how he set an extra mug on the table without needing to ask if she'd join him. One morning, as she was pressing out the creases on a clean sheet, Silas stepped through the door, tugging off his gloves. "I'll be riding out to the north fence today," he said, voice low from the chill. "There's been signs of elk pushing through. Might be a break in the line." She folded the sheet and set it aside. "Do you want help?" He hesitated. "It's rough going. Snow's packed hard and it's a long ride." "I don't mind the cold." He gave a small nod, not quite agreement, but not refusal either. "If you're coming, you'll need thicker boots. Mine won't fit you." She didn't smile, but her eyes lifted. "Then I'll have to make do with what I have." The ride north took most of the morning. The land rose slowly, the pines thickening into a shadowy band that carved through the hills like a scar. They spoke little, the horse's breath ghosting in the air in front of them. At the edge of a ravine, Silas dismounted and led them down on foot, boots crunching over old snow. He showed her a tear in the wire where something large had pushed through. The top strand hung loose, swaying faintly. He crouched to examine the tracks, gloved hand brushing the earth. "Cow," he murmured. "Lost from one of the neighbors' herds, maybe, but see here." He pointed to a sharp indent near the hoofprints. "Wolves came after. Can't say if they caught it." Della knelt beside him, her skirts catching on the dry grass. "You can tell all that just from a few marks." "Not all of it," he said, glancing over. "Some of it's guesswork. But enough to know we'll need to patch this quick." They worked together, her holding the wire steady while he pulled it tight with a fence tool. Her arms ached, but she didn't complain. Once finished, They sat on a flat rock near the trees, sharing a strip of dried venison from his coat pocket. She chewed slowly, watching a hawk circle above the ridge. "My father never believed in idleness," she said. "Even when he was sick, he'd find something to fix, said a person's hands should always be moving." Silas pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his wind-tossed hair. "That's so," he said. "Too much stillness lets the sorrow creep in." She looked down at her lap. "I didn't understand it then. I do now." He didn't reply right away. His gaze was on the mountains to the west, where the sun had begun to burn through the clouds in streaks of pale gold. "Seems to me you're not the kind who stays still anyhow," he said. She turned toward him. "How do you mean?" He met her eyes, quiet and sure. "You came all this way not knowing what you'd find, and when it wasn't what you hoped, you didn't fold. You got up the next day and started making things better." The wind caught her hair, pulling it loose from its tie. She didn't reach to fix it. "I didn't think anyone noticed that." "I did." They said nothing more on the ride back. But when they returned, and she stepped down from her horse with stiff legs and sore hands, she felt something in her settle. Not ease, exactly, but anchor. That evening, as the fire crackled low, Silas brought out a small wooden box. He opened it on the table, revealing bits of leather, brass buttons, a broken watch. "I was going to give these to Tom," he said. "Odds and ends from an old saddle he liked to tinker." Della reached for a button, turning it over in her fingers. "You too close." Silas leaned back in his chair. "We worked cattle together a few summers back. Got along fine. He could be hard to like, but he was decent. His boys were already grown when his wife passed, but he still talked about her like she was in the next room." She set the button down. "I imagine he wanted someone to fill the silence." Silas looked at her. "Don't we all?" She stood and poured water into the basin, her hands moving slow. "I didn't come here to be mourned over," she said. "I don't think you did." When she turned, he was still watching her, steady and sure. And in that look, there was no pity, only a quiet regard, as if he saw her not as a woman who'd been left behind, but as one who had arrived. He rose, nodding once. "I'll be out early. Snow's coming in." She reached for the lamp, fingers brushing the edge. "I'll be up." He paused at the door. "You always are." And then he stepped into the night, leaving her in the hush of the room, the warmth of the fire, and the sound of a heart beginning to believe it might be welcome. The snow came in slow, sifting down from the sky like sifted flour through a cracked sieve. By mid-afternoon, the hills had softened, and the fence posts wore pale caps. Della watched through the kitchen window while the wind leaned hard against the barn, making the doors groan on their hinges. Silas hadn't come in for dinner. She'd ladled stew onto a tin plate and set it aside, covered with a cloth to keep it warm. The dog had barked once near noon, but no rider appeared, and she'd returned to her sewing with a tightness in her chest she didn't name. By the time she heard the creak of the porch boards, the stew had long gone cold. He stepped inside, brushing the snow from his shoulders, his coat damp at the seams. One of his gloves was torn across the palm. "There's a heifer gone lame in the east pasture," he said, setting his hat on the peg near the door. "Took longer than it should have." She put down her needle. "You should have eaten before going out." "I didn't think it'd take near so long." She brought him the plate without another word. He ate standing near the stove, the silence between them thick with steam and wood smoke. When he set the fork down, he said, "You ever see a cow try to walk on 3 legs in 6 inches of snow? I haven't. Looks just like a man trying to dance with 2 nails in his boot." She let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. He glanced over, not smiling, but something eased in his shoulders. "I'll have to splint her leg tomorrow. Might need to cut her loose from the rest." "I can help you," she said. He looked at her, then reached for the kettle. "You know anything about livestock?" "No," she said. but I know how to follow instructions." He poured water into his cup, then into hers. That's more than some ranch hands manage. They drank in silence a while. The snow thickened outside, muting the world to a hush. "You ever think about heading back east?" he asked, not looking at her. "Not anymore." He gave a slight nod. "You miss it, only the sound of rain on a roof. That's a fine sound." She turned her cup in her hands. "What about you? Ever think about leaving this place? I tried once." He leaned back against the stove, arms folded, made it as far as Cheyenne. "Didn't take." "Why not?" "Too many people, too much noise. I like knowing the shape of the land under my boots." The fire popped. She looked at his torn glove on the table, the frayed edge curling inward. "I can mend that." He glanced at it. "It'll only tear again. Then I'll mend it again." He didn't answer, but he didn't move the glove either. That night, she lit a second lamp and stayed up stitching the leather, her fingers moving slow and sure. When she finished, she left it on the table and went to bed. The next morning, it was gone from where she'd left it. In its place sat a folded square of paper. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, in a firm, unpolished hand, were 3 words. "Thank you, Della." She didn't smile. But she held the note a moment longer than needed before tucking it inside her Bible. Later, as she poured oats for the hens, Silas came around the side of the chicken coop, his breath clouding in the air. "I was thinking," he said. "Come spring, I'll need help planting the south field." She looked up at him. "You trust me with that?" He wiped his hand down the front of his coat. "I trust you to learn." She nodded once, the cold biting at the tips of her ears. "I'd like that." He shifted, the toe of his boot scuffing the frozen ground. "You ever think about staying on permanent?" She blinked. "At the ranch," he met her gaze. "With me." The air between them felt still, like the land waiting under the snow. "I would," she said. "If you're asking." "I am." She stepped closer, the oat sack forgotten in her hand. "Then yes." He reached out, took the sack from her, and set it down. His hand found hers, rough and warm. No more was said. But the wind quieted, and the sky lightened faintly, as if the day had decided to begin again. By mid-March, the snow had begun to break its grip on the land. Meltwater ran in thin rivulets down the ruts in the road, and the brittle grasses along the fence line had started showing threads of green. The afternoon stretched longer, sun warming the porch rail, where Della now often sat just after chores, hands idle for the first time in months. Silas had taken to checking the lower pastures every evening, boots heavy with mud on his return. He'd leave his coat by the door, scratch behind the dog's ears, and glance toward the kitchen, always finding Della there, sleeves rolled, hair tied back in a way that no longer looked borrowed from another life. One Sunday, after the noon meal, Silas brought out a small tin of nails and 2 hinges. "I was thinking I'd fix the gate on the south pen," he said, sliding the tin across the table. "Could use a second pair of eyes to hold it level." Della rose and reached for her shawl. "I'll come." They walked the slope behind the barn, boots sinking into thaw-soft ground. The gate hung crooked between 2 posts, one of which leaned like a drunk against the wind. Silas crouched to dig around the base while Della steadied the frame, the wood cold beneath her palms. "Did you ever want children?" she asked, not looking away from the gate. He paused, earth caking his gloves. "I did, once. Life didn't turn that way," she nodded, shifting her grip. "My mother lost 2 before me. By the time I came along, she was tired. I don't think she ever forgave herself for surviving the rest." Silas stood, brushing dirt from his trousers. "You think that's something you'd want still?" Della hesitated. "I don't know, but I think I'd like the chance to find out." He handed her a nail, then lifted the hinge into place. "Then you should have it." They worked in silence for a while, the kind that held nothing back and asked nothing extra. When the last nail was driven in, he stepped back, eyeing the gate. "It'll hold now," he said. She looked at him, arms still folded against the breeze. "So will I." A few days later, the circuit preacher came through on his monthly ride. He stayed the night, bedding down in the hayloft after sharing boiled potatoes and salt pork with them at the table. Morning came cold and bright, and Della stood outside beside Silas while the preacher adjusted his saddle. "Folks'll be gathering up at the Dawson place come April," he said, swinging one leg over his gelding. "I'll be marrying the Laskin girl to that miner from Butt. Could do another service if any of you got the notion." He tipped his hat and rode off before either of them answered. Silas didn't say anything until they were halfway back to the house. "Wouldn't need much. A witness, maybe." "You've already made this place more yours than mine." Della bent to pick up a dropped clothespin near the porch. "I didn't come here looking for a ceremony. I know that." She turned, clothespin still in her hand. "But I would stand with you if you asked. I'm asking." She didn't smile. Just stepped closer and slid her fingers into his. That evening, she brought out a small scrap of ivory-colored muslin from her trunk. "It was meant for a window," she said, turning the fabric in her lap. "But I think I'll make a collar instead." Silas set a hand on the back of her chair, leaning down slightly. "You'll be the finest thing this house has ever seen." She brushed her fingers over the fabric. "I want no promises but one." He knelt beside her, the floor creaking under his weight. "Name it. That whatever comes next, we meet it together." He lowered his head until his brow rested against her skirt. "We will." That night, the wind carried the first scent of damp earth through the open window. Della lay awake, listening to the slow breath of the man beside her, the hush of a house that had settled into peace. The station where she'd been left behind felt distant now, like the echo of another life. Spring would come, and with it, planting and long days in the field. But for now, the land slept easy, and so did they. The morning of the wedding dawned with a gold-tinged stillness, the kind of quiet that settled over the land only after the last frost had truly passed. Della stood at the wash basin in the front room, pinning her hair in place with fingers steadied by purpose. The muslin collar she'd sewn by lamplight lay smooth against her throat, its edge stitched with a row of tiny, even knots. She wore no perfume, only the faint scent of lavender from the soap she'd used. Silas waited outside with the wagon already loaded, 2 chairs in the back for the preacher, and a wool blanket folded over the seat. He'd shaved with a dull razor and combed his hair, though a stubborn cowlick refused to lie flat, and he'd let it be. When Della stepped out, he looked at her like he had something to say but didn't trust the words yet to carry the weight of it. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, then climbed up beside him, her gloved hand resting near his on the reins. The Dawson place sat atop a knoll with a view that reached all the way to the Bitterroots on a clear day, and this one was clear. A handful of neighbors had come, drawn more by the promise of stew and pie than ceremony. Mrs. Gable brought a rhubarb tart and her youngest boy, who'd never seen a wedding and kept pulling at his collar. Mr. and Mrs. Dawson stood close together near their porch, arms linked, a quiet steadiness between them that had taken years to earn. The preacher wore a clean shirt and carried a Bible wrapped in a strip of oilcloth. He cleared his throat once and began without flourish, the words plain, honest, and spoken to the wind as much as the people. Della didn't look away from Silas. His eyes held hers the entire time, unflinching. When it came time to speak, he said, "I never expected this. But I want it, and I want you." Della's voice was steady. "I came here with nothing certain, but I found what I didn't know I needed. I will stand with you." The preacher nodded and closed the book. Mrs. Dawson clapped once, then caught herself. The boy let out a whoop before his mother hushed him. Silas pressed his hand to Della's back as they turned toward the wagon. She leaned into it just slightly, enough for him to feel the weight of her trust. They rode home in a hush that wasn't silence so much as presence. The land spread out before them, thawed, open, and waiting. That evening, Della hung the muslin collar near the window to keep it from creasing. Silas lit the fire and brought in a fresh log, the scent of pine curling through the room. He sat beside her, their knees touching. "I thought I'd live out here alone," he said. "Didn't feel like a loss until you showed up. I thought I'd have to shape myself into someone new to be wanted," she said, "but you never asked me to change." "I wanted you just as you were," he said, "and I still do." She leaned forward, her hand finding his. "Then let's build a life with what we have." He kissed her then, not rushed, not shy. It was the kind of kiss that belonged to people who'd earned it, who'd carried hunger quietly and now knew how to hold it close without fear. The next weeks passed with the rhythm of early spring. They planted potatoes in the lower field, their boots sinking into soft earth. Della marked rows with a string and a sharpened stick while Silas dug evenly spaced furrows. They worked side by side, sleeves rolled, sweat at the base of their spines, and when a cold gust came down from the hills, they leaned into it together. Inside, the house began to change. Della moved Silas's tools from the kitchen shelf to a proper box near the back door. He didn't complain. She hemmed new curtains with flower sack cloth, and he built a shelf for her books above the hearth. They didn't talk about what belonged to who. Everything now belonged to both. One night, as the wind rose and the shutters rattled, Della sat near the fire, a folded bundle in her lap. "I've been keeping something," she said. Silas looked up from the oil lamp he was trimming. She unwrapped a small, worn journal with a broken clasp. "It was my father's. He wrote in it during the war, mostly prayers and notes. I haven't opened it in years. You want to read it now?" She shook her head. "I want to bury it, not to forget, but to let it rest. I'll help you." At dawn, they walked to the edge of the pasture where the earth had softened. She dug while he stood nearby. When the journal was placed in the hole, she said nothing, only pressed the dirt back with calm hands. He took her fingers in his, and they stood like that until the sun crested the ridge. That spring, the hens began laying twice what they had through winter. The dog grew slow and content, sleeping near the stove most days. Della planted herbs in a box along the window, and Silas began carving handles for new tools with scraps of ashwood. Sometimes they sat on the porch after supper, not for any reason but to be near the quiet. They didn't speak much on those nights. They didn't need to. One evening, as dusk turned the sky to slate, Della rested her head on Silas's shoulder. "I didn't know peace could feel like this," she said. He turned his face toward her hair. "It's not peace if it can be lost." She reached for his hand. "Then we won't lose it." And they didn't. Years passed. The fields grew full. A child's laughter echoed through the house, and then another joined it. The porch boards wore smooth from small feet and long evenings. The muslin collar was packed into a cedar box along with the journal's ribbon, and a smooth stone from the creek where Silas had once taught a boy to fish. Their hair grayed. The land changed, but their hands never stopped finding each other in the dark. And in the quiet moments, the ones between chores and rainstorms, between planting and harvest, they always came back to the porch, to the stillness, and to each other. Because some beginnings come disguised as endings, and some loves are built not in thunder, but in the hush that follows it.